Ladies and gentlemen, please silence your phones and hush your babies. The show is about to start.
I offer my personal welcome to this
Nemo
and Cole Conference
halftime
show.
Hello everyone, and welcome back to the final of the Nemo and Co Conference halftime shows for this, the 195th annual conference, I think it is, because it's the 195-year anniversary of the restoration of the church, or certainly the founding of the church. Welcome one and all. The numbers. You all want to know about Jesus, Joe, or Russell, don't you? And I shall oblige. Here we go. Jesus with 69 quotes, Joe with 18 quotes, the most he's had in a long time, and Russell M. Nelson with 52. So if you were to add the times that Russell M. Nelson and Joseph Smith were quoted in that conference, you would beat the amount of times Jesus was quoted by one. But Jesus won out, which is great. Glad to see it. Happy to see it. Not a surprise, given that it's an Easter conference, and that's what we're sort of looking at this time of year, and the Easter story would be interesting. But as we saw, some people, like Neil L. Anderson, decided to use this sacred time of year, the Easter season, to talk about abortion. So, not everyone was up for talking about Jesus tons, but some people did, and enough people did that he won out here. So that's great. And who could I have with me to talk about this? Who would you all like to see? Well, it only has to be the UK's number one apostate, Peter Bleakley.
Woo! We're there. Party on. You've made it, Nemo. What a stunning achievement.
I've made it clad in my tapir jumper.
Hey!
Courtesy of Wine Mum Jared. Check out Wine Mum Jared on Instagram for funky, fresh attire such as this. Let's get on with it, Peter, because the night is still young and I could actually get to bed at a decent hour. Nelson finally showed up. Russell Nelson finally turned up to a session of conference. I wondered whether he would phone it in throughout, but he didn't. He came, he saw, and he gave a pre-recorded message. But we'll get to his pre-recorded message later. I won't, however, keep you waiting to find out where the temples are. I forgot to fill in the number, actually. I put X new temples. It was 15 new temples. Yeah. Reynosa, Mexico, Carlilos, Peru, Rivera, Uruguay, Campo Grande, Brazil, Porto, Portugal. So there's a European temple there. Uyo, Nigeria. San Jose del Monte, Philippines. Numea, New Caledonia, which we've decided New Caledonia is in the sea north of Australia somewhere. Let me know in the comments if that is correct. Liverpool, Australia. When he said Liverpool, I thought Scousers were getting a temple for a moment, but no, it's just Liverpool, Australia. Caldwell, Idaho. Flagstaff, Arizona. Rapid City, South Dakota. Greenville, South Carolina. Norfolk, Virginia. Spanish Fork, Utah. I've just been to Spanish Fork recently. Not a lot there, but yeah, they're getting temples. People in the comments saying that this means the church is growing. Just reminded, this doesn't mean the church is growing in anything but wealth, because all this means is the church can afford to build more temples. Doesn't mean that they have the members to staff them. I think it's fairly well understood now that the old rules about the amount of members there used to have to be, in order to have a temple, and all those sorts of rules about tithe payers, all that sort of stuff seems to have gone out the window. And Russell Nelson has just decided he's building temples, and he's building them quick, because he wanted to beat Gordon B. Hinckley, and he's sure done that if all the temples he's announced actually get built, because the ratio of announced to built is not great.
Well, it's crazy. I was looking at their statistical. If you go to the website now, you can see the statistical analysis, and there's very few of the temples actually being built. He just keeps announcing dozens, but very few under construction. So they've got a huge backlog to try and catch up.
Can I point to something here Vocalize said? I didn't hear her talk about steeples. That's interesting. I didn't hear her talk about steeples either. And in fact, a new temple rendering has been shown for a temple in Guatemala, I think, which doesn't have a steeple, doesn't have a tall steeple at all. It's got a capped kind of nub.
It looks really nice, actually, that one. And
Yeah.
also, we had a talk, as we'll get to, about the beauty of a clear night sky without a
Yeah.
temple floodlit ruining
Hmm.
it for you.
Yeah. But Fairview,
So,
Texas may
yeah.
lose their night sky to all this. So, yeah, so that's the temple announcements. We had 5 women speak in this conference, of which 2 were prayers. So 3 women gave talks,
Yeah.
and uh,
Same as last time.
last
They've
time
been doing that consistently for a long time now. 3 women
this
speaking.
this is the way that they do these things. I
Unbelievable.
think they had 4 women speak once, and it was like,
Mm.
whoa, and they've just never done it again. Um, So, but we were glad to hear the talks we got from the sisters were great, great talks.
Mm,
Um,
mm,
Consistently, some of the best talks were from the sisters. So,
mhm,
the reason we want to hear more from the sisters is because they give good talks. So
mm.
let's unleash
Yeah,
them.
some of them do.
Hear
Some of
more
them
of
are
them.
batshit crazy.
They
Ah,
can be a bit
but, um,
mental, like
but
your children falling out
oh
of bed
lord,
because they didn't get far enough in. Thank you,
yes,
Joy D.
that was
Jones, for that
scary.
one. But
My lord.
this session, we've had some good
Yeah,
stuff.
very
Definitely.
good. Yeah.
Dieter Uchtdorf was conducting. You reckoned, Peter, this might be a bit of an olive branch before Nelson passes away. He lets him conduct a session of
Mm.
conference.
Well, he hasn't got any status. Otherwise, why would
No.
they choose him? Because he's not president of the 12. I mean, he is
But they chose
fairly
Anderson and
soon.
Suarez.
I suppose. Yeah,
So
that's
I think
true.
they're just passing it around amongst the young
Mm,
ones because Renland and Rasband conducted
yeah,
some last time as well.
yeah. Okay.
So, but it could
Mm,
be. David L. Buckner gave us our opening prayer, which is fine. And then we had Suarez, silky smooth South American brother, came in and gave an interesting
mm.
talk. Um,
Can I just, as we go
yeah,
today, again, I just want to point out what these people's careers are.
sure.
So David Buckner, he ticked all the boxes. So
Go for it.
he's got experience in international relations. This is the guy who
Mhm.
gave the opening talk, which is what Gong does. He's got an MBA and he's a lawyer. So he's got all 3 going on. He just needs to to be a paramedic or something, and he's there.
Mhm.
He represents. So he's like a
Nice.
microcosm of all of the general authorities. He's ticking all the boxes.
We've got
Suarez
someone
is an
one sec before we get to
MBA.
Suarez.
Oh, go
We've
on.
got someone here
Yeah.
saying they're still waiting on the temple from Russia in
Well,
2018, which is and the temple that
Oof,
was announced for Shanghai, People's Republic of China,
yeah.
still not seen
Well,
ne'er a peep out of that.
Rus
So,
Russia's trying to bomb the one in Ukraine, and
yeah.
pretty
Well,
soon Shanghai will be trying to
s
bomb the one in Taiwan, so they don't
some
deserve them.
people some people rather morbidly said that the way Russia was gonna get its temple was they were gonna obviously invade Ukraine, take over Kyiv, and then that would be a Russia
Good
temple, right?
lord.
But it never happened. Um,
Mm,
so and
may it never happen.
obviously, I wouldn't imagine the church to be going in and building a temple in Russia right now, given everything that's going on. But it's almost the sort of thing that you
Mm,
would expect, a prophet, seer, and revelator to maybe think might be on the horizon, given that many people
mm,
who were watching the situation knew as early as 2014 that this would eventually kick off. So,
mm,
it's not like no one saw anything. Also, yeah, Dubai temple announced that we've still not seen a peep out
mm.
of yet.
No.
So, you can announce temples all he wants, but getting them built is
Mm,
a different thing. Just like with McKinney, is a
mm.
different thing indeed. So here we go. David L. Buckner, Ulysses Suarez, he was an MBA and worked for the
And an
church, I think.
accountant and an auditor.
Okay,
So
nice.
all good skills for running a business corporation
Hmm.
of the president of the Church of Jesus
Yes.
Christ of Latter-day Saints.
And he kind of started with a bit of a slippery slope argument about how the world
Mm,
celebrates the irreverent, and over
mm,
generations we can lose our sense of reverence and we start to disrespect things, etc. Um,
mm,
and it's that typical sort of more socially conservative viewpoint that unless we keep things
mm.
exactly as they are, it's a slippery
Yeah,
slope to anarchy and death. at,
yeah.
at
Or as
hyperbolic levels, right?
yeah. Well, you get one generation of apathy and catapult the next generation into misery by not being
Yes.
reverent enough
Yeah.
of sacred things. I
Um,
thought this was fascinating because he was saying reverence is the essence of spirituality,
mhm,
which in some concepts of spirituality, you could say people go into a sacred space or up a
mhm.
mountain and they're just quiet and peaceful and in awe of nature and the awesomeness of all being, you know. So
Hmm.
that is a version of spirituality. But when you start to police it and insist on it, you lose the other kinds of spirituality of human
Hmm.
connection, of actually having a chat with the person next to you on the pew before sacrament meeting,
Hmm.
rather than sitting there silent and offering them nothing. Um,
Oh,
and
you talked
you've
about
got
kids being on
this,
their phones during sacrament
yeah,
meeting, and
which is fair enough.
fair
You've
enough.
got the as a teacher, I completely agree with that. And but also then you don't it's a cultural thing. You don't understand the spirituality or reverence of happy clappy singing or different cultures that are more expressive in their worship. You know, so it's very
Hmm.
much doubling down on the silent, quiet, reverent thing as the only appropriate.
That's
But
how we do it.
he also had and he had a deeper message, though. It was kind of this people becoming selfish and despising sacred things of God, you know,
Hmm.
feeding Satan's purposes. And what I felt from this was it's this kind of pharisaical stupid thing. Rather than earning respect, you just demand it. You
Hmm.
demand reverence for your
Yes.
religion and for your leadership and your prophet leaders, because that is the same thing as showing respect to God and so on. But there's
It's kind of
nothing
like how
about
they acted in.
earning it, you know.
It's kind
Go
of how
on.
they acted in Fairview, right? They just walked in,
Yeah.
demanded to
Yeah.
be given an
Mm.
exemption,
Yeah.
and
We
they
are
said, "Well,
good.
we'll
You
sue you if
must
you
give
don't
us
give it
what
to
we
us."
want. Yeah. It just really struck me that this is so kind of intrinsic to the LDS mindset these days, probably mostly always been, but of
Mhm.
rather than actually address the reasons people might be feeling irrelevant to you or disrespectful, you know, in a sense, it's about respect, I guess he's demanding.
Mhm.
Um, why not work out why they don't feel an instinctive awe and reverence for you?
Mm.
You know, what's the reason that's broken? And that they this is seen as a generational thing, that this generation will not automatically respect historical institutions. They want reasons for it. And at times the
Mm.
general authorities have talked about this kind of from both sides of that fence. You have to earn it. You've got to have good reason. People can fact check you. So you need to be bringing it with a reason to have respect and awe, not just say, but for generations, people have had this
Respected
kind
religious
of
leaders to
reverential
yeah.
respect for religion. What's wrong with you? You know, we demand you give it back. And
Mhm.
then he took a really odd turn into AI, which was absolutely
Let's get to that.
fascinating.
Let's get to
Have you
that.
got the clip on
I've
that?
got the clip.
Yeah,
I've got 2 clips, so we're gonna split this into 2
yeah,
halves. The first is where he was
yeah.
talking about artwork and just how much thought and effort goes into artwork, which goes back to what you and I were
Mm,
talking about in our first
mm,
session together, Peter. Those
mm.
many, many hours ago, over 24 hours ago now. So much has happened, and yet so little has happened.
Yeah.
But we were talking about how the church uses specific art to send specific messages. And so, with the church's latest essay about race, for them to continue to use pictures of white Jesus undermines that idea that they're trying to blame people for thinking Jesus might have been white when they're putting out pictures of white Jesus. They can't blame the
Mm,
artwork when they're the ones promoting it. And they've continued to use
mm,
pictures of white Jesus throughout conference since. But here's
mm,
what Suarez had to say.
we strive to hold the Father and the Son in the utmost sacredness and respect in every aspect, including how we depict their images. The guidance of the Holy Ghost is a crucial component in determining how these images should reflect the sacred nature, character, and godly attributes of the Father and of the Son. We are very careful to avoid portraying elements that could distract from our primary focus on our Heavenly Father and His Son Jesus.
But don't we think that uh sorry, I don't know what happened there. Don't we think that the
mm,
color of his skin has become a distraction? And so maybe if they just took that away and went for what they've already stated would be the historically accurate
mm,
complexion of Jesus Christ, that would remove that unnecessary distraction, perhaps?
And their
mm.
teachings, including how we apply advanced tools offered by technology, such as using artificial intelligence to generate content and images.
So then he goes into AI
He's
and he's
got a
starting to
bee in
say,
his bonnet.
yeah,
As you listen to this, I'm trying to think, what is the problem he's trying to solve? I
Mhm.
mean, so have you got more of that quote
I've
to
got the
play?
next section.
Yeah. Yeah,
So the
yeah.
next section, he then starts to talk about more generally church sort of programs, church manuals, lesson manuals, etc. Aren't prepared with AI, and we shouldn't be using AI in these ways.
Same
Essentially,
principle is
But
applied
at the
to
same
any
oh, sorry.
source of information available through the official communication channels of the church. Every lesson, book, manual, and message is carefully developed and approved under the direction of the Spirit to make sure we maintain the sacred virtue, values, and standards of the gospel of Jesus Christ.
and that's why it's crazy when someone like Ballard, who's no longer with us, got up and said, "We don't know where
Yeah.
missionaries got this idea from, that they should
Yes.
invite people to baptism." The very carefully considered and put together Preach My Gospel manual, which has been quoted over the
Which he
pulpit at
helped
this
write.
conference, which he helped write, asked missionaries to invite people to baptism on the first lesson.
Yeah. And I was
Anyway,
having literally an hour ago or a few hours ago, an argument again with someone completely anonymous who may or may not be my brother, that who's insisting that the missionaries don't do that still. I'm like, come on,
mhm.
this rushing people to baptism and that would be
Just a
something
quick point
to,
here from Ruth.
that
We're
would
very
make a huge
careful,
difference.
so therefore we
Yeah.
can assume the images used are carefully selected. Absolutely.
I know, exactly. You can't have it both ways. I mean, another thing to but he kept going on about just not using AI to generate images as well.
Mhm.
And I was trying to think, where is this even happening? Is it just he's seen something on TikTok that alarms him? Then I thought of um, Bill Reel and RFM and Rebecca Biblioteca doing their weekly news show. I can't remember what it's called. It slipped my mind. Even though I'm an avid
Mormon
fan.
News Roundup,
Um, yeah,
or
something like that.
mm,
That's our
or is
other
that someone
friend.
else? I
But
don't know.
anyway, one of those, because they now do like an audio AI where they have an intro or an outro done each time in the voice of a general authority or
Mm,
you. They use you at some point. So I'm trying to.
yeah,
That's the only example I can
violating
think
my
of. I'm
intellectual
like,
property.
exactly, and I'm like, has someone shown him this in the office? And he's got to be in his voice that
Maybe he's
uses the
worried
general
that.
authorities' voices for that.
Well,
I don't
okay,
know.
right. Let me get really cynical for a moment, and I'm going to admit that I'm being
Yeah.
very cynical here. When I was in Utah
Mm,
a little while back, I went to a shop that
mm,
sells prints by a Korean artist, I think,
mm,
pictures of Jesus. They're quite popular at the moment, but it sells some originals as well.
mm.
$40,000. Church artwork is lucrative
Mm.
business out in
Oh, yeah.
Utah.
Mm,
Yeah, big
mm,
framed church artwork
yeah.
is lucrative.
Mm,
And so they want to control. Okay, here's what I think is going on. I think they want to control
mm,
pictures of Jesus and how Jesus is portrayed because they've already said that church artwork is carefully
mm,
considered. He's basically going, look,
mm,
these things are carefully considered and guided by the Spirit. So you can't just get AI to do it for you because we're very carefully considering what Jesus's
mm.
complexion is and what color eyes we give him and
Yeah,
just how
and then deny it
how
later.
hench he is. I saw a picture of Enos that's just he was unbelievably ripped. His delts were insane. They got to make these men macho. Um,
Yeah.
so they want to still have charge of that, which means then obviously we get to kind of critique the choices that they choose to make when it comes to their artwork and the distraction it provides over the discussion around race. But I think that's what's going on. Actually, I'm not sure it's about the lucrative art
Mm,
so much as it's about they want to control
mm,
how Jesus is portrayed still, and they're worried that people are just going to
mm.
get go on Dali and get Jesus made up for their church lesson.
I don't know, but this has been going on for several years already. It's so yesterday, the loads of people are using AI to make little movies of well-known characters and memes.
Mhm.
I mean, this is that horse bolted a long time ago, Mr. Suarez. I'm afraid you're a bit late to
Mm.
worrying about that,
Although
and I don't
I
see what
don't
harm you
like
think's
AI
going to be
generated
done.
images. Like, I just there's
They are
something
getting
in me
better.
that doesn't like them.
Yeah.
I don't know whether
I
it's
mean,
because my
that's a
dad's an
yeah,
artist
yeah,
and he
yeah,
draws and
mm,
I
yeah,
I don't know, maybe it's some sort of principled stand, but
yeah.
yeah.
And just a couple more points on this bit is first of all, however, the church has introduced an AI for searching the General Handbook. So the latest iteration of the General Handbook online literally begins with the statement that we now have an AI search engine that you can use initially to kind of get an answer, because they've keep, Keith Erickson and others keep admitting that the church's search ability on its own website is completely useless. Like, even the insiders just go to Google to search the church's own website. They've still not cracked that for some reason. If you try and find anything on there with it, it's pointless. So they've now introduced an AI that you kind of type your question in of information you want from the handbook of instructions, and it will come up with the answer with the places to go looking at and a summary. But then it has a little caveat of, but also, make sure you read the real thing, because this might have got a mistake in it.
It may
So
it may
it's
have
so
just
weird
hallucinated itself
that
into thinking
literally in
coffee's
the
meant to
month
make
the
it go fancy.
church
Yep.
introduces AI as part of its way for all leaders of the church to interact with its own handbook, which they treat on the verge of scripture, that Suarez is now talking about don't trust AI. So I know they kind of write these talks well in advance, so maybe he hadn't got that memo, but it's just a very odd contradiction. And the other thing I wanted to point
Can I
out is
one
for
sec, I
somebody
just wanna
to keep...
grab Doug
Yeah,
Vincent's,
come on.
comment here. He
Yes.
said, "You didn't like my
Oh,
temple
ha,
pics,
ha, ha,
Nero.
ha!
I do find your,
Those are
temple
genius.
images very funny. AI can be amusing at times. Something in me, I just don't like it. Every time I see
We
a
love them, Doug.
yeah.
Ignore
But
him,
I
he's a
like what
Phillips
you
fan.
have chosen to do with it there, Doug. I found what you've done amusing. So I appreciate the effort. I say the effort you put in. I appreciate the keystrokes you typed into DALL-E to get it to produce the artwork. So thank you.
Stop disparaging his creativity. Just don't listen. La 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 la. Okay. But the other thing to look out for throughout this conference session is the
Uh-huh.
patriarchy. Constant
Right.
references to father and son, nothing about Heavenly Mother.
Okay.
Ever since Renland did his telling everyone off for being arrogant if they want to know about Heavenly Mother, not a word. The godly so Suarez is talking about the godly attributes of father and son, but no mother. And there are several of them who make statements where it would be completely appropriate to mention Heavenly Mother, and they absolutely leave her out.
Okay.
So that it's just the
Yeah.
patriarchy red in tooth and claw. All right,
Should we talk
what
about
else
Michael
have we
B.
got from him?
Strong? Because
Yeah,
I really want to talk about this at the moment because I'm still a little bit in shock
can I,
about this talk.
yeah.
For
Can I
those, go on.
sorry, just on Suarez, because
What else did he say?
actually
Oh, he had some genuine emotion because he
miscarriage.
talked about a
Come
dead
on.
child. But
Yes. So listen, what seemed he's and it was beautiful how he expressed it, and this is a contrast to the kind of the cold callousness of just dismissing
okay,
situations where a woman might need an abortion from Anderson, which is going to be one of the major talking points from this whole conference.
I would imagine
He
so.
said, so his second child was miscarried, born prematurely. While my wife was still recovering in the hospital, he prayed for hope. And he said, what seemed like an overwhelming, sorrowful challenge at the time turned into a sacred, reverent experience. What if she'd needed an induced abortion to save her life?
Mhm.
What if the nature of the miscarriage had meant she had to have a D&C? What if, all these things that a lot of Christian nationalists are voting against, being even legal to try, or scaring surgeons into not attempting, with a lot of support from a lot of Mormons. What if their incredible, overwhelming, sorrowful challenge that was one of the worst experiences of his life had a slightly different scenario and ended up on the controversial or forbidden list that
Mm,
Anderson gave earlier? But I thought it was so important to hear someone saying, actually, these situations can be hellish, horrendous, and it's far more than some kind of cynical act of social convenience.
mhm.
So it was a little window into the humanity of being in that situation that I just felt was totally missing from Anderson's
Fair enough.
talk about that. Yeah.
Right.
Okay,
Sounds
Michael,
Mr. Strong.
personal
Um,
discipleship. Michael's a
hang on,
doctor,
hang on. Yeah,
so he's
I've
like
got it, Peter.
he's
Don't you worry. He's a
oh,
brand new
physician,
70.
right?
He's a physician, but he
Yeah.
ended up as head of something at University of Utah.
Yeah.
Quite an important physician by the end. But I want to go to this VT because I've put manslaughter question mark.
Oh my
I'm
gosh.
still
Oh,
in
bless his
shock
heart.
over this.
Yeah.
Bless his heart, but
Oh,
also I'm
it's
confused
horrible to have
because
that happen to you.
he brought this up, but then he didn't say what the actual
Mm,
outcome was. Um,
mm,
I just
yeah.
oh, okay, right. As someone who cycles a lot myself, this is still kind of sitting with me. So let's
Serving
watch.
as a young
Mm,
missionary in South
yeah.
America, I likewise benefited from the compassion of a dear friend. One evening, while I was driving to the home of our mission president, a young man on a bicycle turned suddenly in front of my vehicle. It happened so quickly that I could not avoid the collision. Tragically, this young man was killed by the impact. I was devastated over the loss of his life, terrified and in shock as the awful reality of what had just occurred crashed down upon me.
Before right. I might get some
Poor
flack for
choice of
this,
words.
but
Yeah.
and I'm not laying judgment on him necessarily by saying this. Cyclists don't just turn out in front of you, particularly using the word turn, right? Cyclists can appear out from between cars and you cannot see them. Cyclists can appear, but cyclist turning in front of you means he was already in front of you, which means you've already been watching, which means you've already been giving him space.
Mm,
So there's something that doesn't sit right about this story to me as someone that does a lot of
mm,
cycling and someone who's also very conscious of cyclists when I drive.
mm,
And I don't know quite where to go with that and not to turn this into a big cycling safety debate. But this idea that a cyclist just turns in front of him suddenly and he hasn't got enough room to stop and he hits and kills him. I just don't know what to do with
mm,
it. So
mm.
guys chat in the
Well,
comments about that.
we can't
We
judge because
can't.
we weren't there. We
Like I
don't
said,
know
it's
what
not a point
happened.
of judgment about what he should or shouldn't have done or this or
Mm.
that, but
Some
something about
cyclists
that.
are crazy drivers. I've seen it.
Yeah. Um,
They're not all careful like you.
but then
Mm,
he's like, okay, he kind of hits. He let's finish listening to what he says because
I was
mm,
taken to jail and locked up. I have never felt more frightened and alone.
I believe it.
I was filled with
mm,
despair and fear that I would be imprisoned for the rest of my life. A fellow missionary, Elder Brian Kochever, learned of the accident and was moved by compassion. He came to the jail and pled with the officers to be allowed to stay with me in the cell so that I would not be alone. Miraculously, they agreed.
Like, what about are we not going to hear about this cyclist's family? We're not going to hear about the outcome for him beyond that. We don't hear anything more about the outcome for him beyond that. We don't know how this situation was resolved. Like, it's such a big thing just to drop in a conference.
mm.
I ran
Yeah,
into
that
a
is a bit odd.
cyclist, killed them, but wasn't
Mm,
it a miracle that my companion was able to come to the jail and make me feel better? And yeah, that was a great act of
mm,
compassion by his companion. Fine, but I feel like so much heavy stuff has just been dropped there and then just not talked about
mm,
and just left, and
mm,
it's left me feeling really
mm,
odd that, and I'm
mm.
not quite sure why, other than
Is
potentially,
that just like modern oversensibility? You know, it's he's just talking about a life experience and he's very much acknowledged it was terrible and awful
yeah,
and he was devastated about what happened.
but he
So I mean
killed
his
someone.
context was
Like it's,
well,
I mean, and
yeah.
we have the conference
Well,
death
it's at
march, right?
least
We
it's
have
not
someone who talks about their
totally
kid who drowned or someone
yes,
that runs
that's
over their
true.
kid, right?
Yeah,
So and those haven't hit me the
yeah.
same, but yeah, this has
Yeah, I'd
just
kind of forgotten this because I wrote, "Oh, there was less death in this conference death march," but no, you're right. The people, cyclists got killed.
just
Um,
ran someone down and then yeah.
I nearly did this to some poor guy. I was right when I was 14. I ran across the road outside my school to catch
Mhm,
our coach because it always left too early, and entirely my own fault. I just ran in front of some poor university student's car,
mhm.
and he hit me, and I broke my leg and ended up in hospital with concussion and in traction for months. Um, So, you know, and the poor guy, I'd love to sort of say to him, "I'm so sorry I did that to you," because it must have been absolutely traumatizing. And I've got a friend
Mhm,
who was driving country lanes late at night, and a drunk driver just pulled in front of him and was killed, and it wasn't his fault. So
mhm.
these things can happen.
Yeah.
And it
Like I
is
said, I'm not
devastating.
judging
It's a
him, and
shock.
I'm not saying he
Yeah,
was.
yeah,
I don't know enough
yeah,
about the situation to say he was in the wrong. But there's some things
mm,
about it that don't sit right with me, and
yeah.
I know it's distracted me. So I didn't get much else out of his talk. So you're gonna have to take the lead on the actual message of his talk
Yes.
because that just
Well, it was,
completely.
yeah, yeah, of
Yeah.
course. No, it's jarring. So it was all about love in action as charity. So he was saying there are three ways that we can show charity, and that's actually this session had a lot of really good meaty Christianity in it. That we should celebrate, along with weirdness. So the first is to have compassion, and he was talking about his friend's compassion who kind of came and sat with him in jail. And
Mhm.
I love that. There a few people who dared to kind of mention unusual scenarios, go to the prison and sit with the person who's been accused of
Mhm.
something terrible as an act of Christ-like compassion.
Yeah.
That's wonderful. Observe and minister to unspoken needs. So that's lovely. That's about being sensitive to people's, they might not just have one thing going on. And also, I like this unconventional acts of kindness,
Mhm.
for which he referenced helping some farmers get their rice harvested so they could go to the temple and be sealed. I didn't see that as very unconventional, but I love the idea of unconventional acts of kindness, that
Mhm.
you step outside the usual concept of what an
Sort of
act of
rote
kindness is.
ministering
Yeah,
cliches.
yes,
Yeah.
exactly. So, I mean,
Mhm.
helping someone do the harvest, that's completely conventional. There's nothing weird about that. But I love that idea and what that could possibly mean.
Mhm.
Um, and but uplift and befriend those who feel offended or forgotten.
Mhm.
Um, and again, it's all a lot of the talks. It's so normalized now that they know that, although despite all the silly claims about constant growth and millions of missionaries and everything, they
Mhm.
know that the reality that most people listening to this conference are dealing with is their children leaving the church and their wards disintegrating in many cases. So there is a lot, either subtly or overtly, about how do you deal with faith crisis, or how do you reach out to people in it. And when I
Mm.
heard those words, um, uplift and befriend those who feel offended or forgotten.
Mhm.
I actually feel offended and forgotten
Okay.
when I'm at church, because if I try to speak up with my concerns, in a sense representing the people who've left that used to be there and they have forgotten them, um, that can be very difficult when I get a hostile reaction.
Mm.
Um, And I have, I've been highly offended by, in a sense, the total betrayal of people I trusted turning out to be lying criminals. That's pretty betraying,
Mm.
or offensive. But I have, um, there are people in my wards who, every time I'm there, reach out the hand of friendship, who welcome me, even though I'm sometimes a bit difficult for them to handle. They show care and compassion, and they ask how Lynn's doing, and they do that. And so I really feel it, and I love that. So I
Mhm.
just thought, actually, there's some good reasons to be offended, but I love, that I recognize that they are practicing that aspect of compassion, of Christ-like charity. I want to big up to my rapidly dying Gravesend ward. Ah,
Mhm.
love them.
There you go.
Um,
Let's talk to D. Scott
mm,
Whiting, who oversaw my sort of
yes,
betrayal by my state president, who reassured me that things were fine, and then they turned out not to be fine.
yeah, yeah. That's
Scott
that's
G.
not him.
That's
You've
not
got the wrong
him.
picture.
Ah, I didn't
What
change
have
the
you done?
picture. That's Ruben V. Alloard,
Mm,
just for those who
it
want to
is.
know. That's not Scott D. Whiting. Scott D.
Anyway,
Whiting just
Scotty.
oversaw um, the dedication of the Birmingham Temple. Now, he started with a
Yeah,
genuinely funny story, and
I
it
love this
genuinely was
talk. He
funny.
was so much fun.
Loved that
Why isn't
story.
he fun in Europe?
Yeah, I played pranks like that on Young Men's Camp. So many people have got involved in pranks on Young Men's
Yeah,
Camp. It was a
yeah.
good laugh, and then he kind of said, "Well,
He
jokes on
sat
me
on
because
a
I sat on a
cactus.
cactus." But then he said became a talk about focusing on hiding to avoid consequences and how you can't hide from God and this sort of stuff.
Mm,
Right? Great talk. Um, but I thought, is he really saying this?
mm.
And hopefully you'll see why I'm asking myself that question. Is he really saying this out loud?
So we avoid consequences. It is this final behavior I will focus on today, hiding after we do something that we should not. Now, I'm not equating my childish prank with grievous sin, but we can draw some parallels that may prove useful as we are tested in our mortal sojourn.
Okay, so he's talking about how we shouldn't hide to avoid consequences. Mormon Church and its
Nah.
investment advisor fined by US regulators for creating 13 clone LLCs to hide the size and nature of the church's wealth from members because they wanted to avoid the consequences, according to Roger Clark, who ran Enzyme Peak, that if the public found out about the fund's wealth, they might discourage from paying tithing. He said, paying tithing is more of a sense of commitment than it is the church needing the money. So they never wanted to be in a position where people felt like, they shouldn't make a contribution. That was also found in the case of the SEC against the church. That was admitted by the church. It was admitted by the SEC. These were admitted facts by both sides. And similarly, Todd Budge just put $1 million in a box
On
that
his
asked
tax
about the
returns.
assets of the church and the tax returns. And he said it
Literally the
wasn't an
tax
accurate
return.
answer. It wasn't meant to be an accurate answer. It was simply
Mm.
meant to communicate that we don't feel that we're obliged to fill in that box.
We'll hide it from the IRS,
So the church
and
hiding
that's
things
fine,
and
'cause we're
obfuscating
a church.
to try and avoid the consequences of the public finding out the size of their wealth, it is incredibly hypocritical for D. Scott Whiting to be giving a talk about how you can't hide from God, you can't hide from consequences, when the church has tried to do exactly the same thing institutionally. And they tried to hide the 1832 account of the first vision, tore it out, and then they've ended up putting it back. Right? So when
Oh,
Ballard says, "Oh, we haven't tried to hide anything from anyone," yes, you did.
they're still
Yeah.
hiding the William Clayton diaries.
Yeah.
It's all ongoing,
Hmm.
and the list is
So
endless. Yeah,
yeah.
absolutely.
So
It's just
I
that
was
yeah.
outraged, almost. Well, not
Practice what
outraged,
you
but
preach, guys,
yeah,
like,
it was
'cause you don't
incredibly
get away with
hypocritical.
it, people find out, and,
Hmm.
it's embarrassing. So
Yeah.
Scott's a lawyer and a real estate developer. Um, we've just last Sunday was the 5th Sunday, and it was literally part of our 5th Sunday lesson time was spent watching him as Europe Area President and his councillors, Alan Phillips, who also got
Hmm.
to do a prayer at this conference, and another guy who's European, and I can't remember his name. Um, their great vision to save Europe. Now, we both watched their training leadership
Hmm.
meeting a year ago, which had no original ideas whatsoever, except Alan Phillips suggested that they should coordinate youth, young people's sort of planning meetings with the meetings of the grown-up state leaders, so that on the way home in the car, they can encourage each other and have these amazing conversations about what happened in their meetings. And that was literally the only original thought they
Mm.
had in their heads for saving Europe's. This time they had 3 ideas. One, which they've talked about before, was to make sacrament meetings interesting and engaging. And an extra thing there was that they're actually encouraging the missionaries now to invite people to church straight away before an discussion,
Mhm.
which is sort of genius, but also problematic, because everyone now at church is walking on eggshells, because we have these people who just walk in who've clearly know nothing about the church at all, haven't even had a discussion with the missionaries, and
Mhm.
they're now sitting there in our sacrament meetings and our elders quorum lessons and our relief society lessons. So what can you say? It's like first discussion time every Sunday. You can't
Yep.
get into anything else particularly. So that is a bit difficult. And to really, really lean on young people to keep serving missions. I think they're aware that the missionary numbers are going to crash now with the post-COVID bubble popping,
Mhm.
even though they keep talking about how it's all going gangbusters at the moment. But I think they can see that on the horizon. And the other one was to identify someone every month,
Mhm.
as Relief Society and Elscom, who needs an ordinance, and
Yep.
you focus on them. They become the project. How do we get this person to their next ordinance? And I
Mhm.
didn't think that was so bad, but a friend messaged me like they are going to be all over me now because he's not married yet,
Mhm.
or what's it going to be? And it could actually become quite an invasion of privacy. So anyway, that's the extent of their genius plan to stop the massive hemorrhaging of members in Europe. So it was amazing to see Scott actually being quite fun and entertaining, because
Mhm.
he's usually literally the general handbook in human form, and they just read chunks of it. And
Yeah.
Hans Boom, who was Europe area president before him,
He
was
spoke.
exactly the same. You know, just
Again, he
totally
spoke
dull.
yesterday.
No, yeah. So yeah, so it's just weird to see him being fun.
Yeah.
It's like,
Then
bring that to Europe, that will help.
we got
Um,
Christopher H. Kim was
mhm,
next. He's a General Authority 70. He's the Asia North Area Presidency second counselor. His
mm,
talk, I don't think we need to spend much time on because it was pretty innocuous.
yeah.
I found
So
it
Layman
quite
and
lovely.
Lemuel, yeah, he's an
He
MBA.
mentioned Jesus 4 times, and Russell only once.
Mm,
So
mm,
he did well. What's his background?
mm. He MBA,
Okay, nice, standard.
businessman.
Yep.
So Layman and Lemuel were very naughty and hard-hearted. They were blinded. Don't be blinded and stubborn, and more focused on worldly ideas and the good stuff. And he said that in the Korean translation of the Book of Mormon, they use the words one uk, which is stubborn
Mhm.
and wicked, for hard-hearted.
Mhm.
Um, and if you get lesser and lesser portions of the spirit if you're hard-hearted, and it withdraws. Therefore, you should repent daily. And he quoted Nelson saying, "The Savior loves us always, but especially when we repent."
Oh, it's
This
more
sort
of
of,
this. You're Jesus'
again,
special favorite when
Jesus
you.
loves
Yeah.
people more. Practice humility, trust and rely on the Savior. So good sort of basic repentance stuff.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Okay. Let's move on to the
Patrick.
next one, if I lose run, because we're going to have plenty
Ah,
to say about our dear,
yeah. Look at his
our
dreamy
dear man,
eyes. How
Patrick.
can we love him more?
I've still got the picture from
Oh,
last conference halftime show that you did, Peter, which is
with all the
him
hearts.
on a Union flag with all the
Oh,
hearts on it. Um, so
look
yeah,
at him. How can you not love that little
mm.
face? Look, little British adorableness.
His
Beautiful.
talk was
What
great,
a
and
man.
he came out of the gate with
This
penguins,
was
one of
so
my
cool.
favorite animals,
Yes.
and then chitty chitty bang bang. Because his talk
Right.
was all about
Penguins
gifts.
first.
Hang on, hang on.
Yeah. Oh,
His
go
talk
on.
was all about
And he
gifts,
had a visual aid.
and he had a visual aid, which we'll get to. His
He
talk
held
was
up a
all
present.
about gifts and how penguins give each other gifts
Mm.
of shiny little rocks, and isn't that awesome? And just I love penguins, but that's a whole different it's a whole different
Oh,
conversation to
but
have
no,
about how
no, no,
great
no.
penguins
You're
are.
missing the message here. So
Go
Patrick
on.
always does something rebellious. So he was
Mhm.
the guy who did the talk about being nice to refugees
Yeah.
when there was all the anti-refugee rhetoric.
Mhm.
Um, and he's always fighting for the underdog. So Trump has put major tariffs on a tiny
Oh,
island in
no,
the Antarctic,
Peter, we're
which
not going
is
into Trump
only
and his
inhabited
tariffs.
by penguins. So here, Patrick Kieran was clearly showing solidarity
I
with
don't
the
think he
oppressed penguins.
was.
Good for him.
I
Of
don't think
course
that's
he
where he
was.
was going.
He's
But
not stupid. He's a clever man. I loved it. Very good
okay.
for him.
Right. Well,
Um,
anyway, he wanted
and
a Chitty
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 Bang
Bang
Bang.
Bang toy, which, for those who don't know, this is what the Chitty Chitty
Uh,
Bang Bang car looks like. Hearing him say the phrase Chitty Chitty Bang Bang in conference several times was just excellent in and of itself.
mm,
Loved that about it. But his love of cars, because he eventually got one, and he was talking about how wonderful the
mm,
gift felt, and he was trying to get people to really, really sit in what or really reflect on what it feels like to give a good gift and receive a good gift, and how
mm,
those feelings feel.
mm.
And he did such a great job of sort of evoking those emotions because he's a great communicator.
You know what's
Um,
coming.
but his love of cars did continue into adulthood. The great thing about Patrick Kieran being from the UK is that I am able to talk to plenty of people that know him and have served under him. He was their state president. He set them apart as a bishop, etc., etc.
He's
People that
such a
worked with
good
him.
state
I've
president.
heard nothing but good
Yeah.
things about him, but a little bit of a speed demon. Um, just for those that don't know, Patrick Kieran was in 1998 fined for speeding. He was 36 at the time, lived on Argyle Road in Clevedon. He was fined £540 for speeding,
Ooh,
which is a
ow.
cracking fine. And fines in the UK are proportionate to how quick you're going. so he will have been going a good clip. So clearly
Oh,
he was probably trying to get his car to take off like the car in Chitty Chitty Bang Bang, trying to get some good speed up. And yeah, it doesn't really matter. It's old news. It's just a speeding fine, I guess.
it's so
But
funny.
it's always funny to remember that he, clearly is a human being, and had a thing for cars at one point.
Think there weren't any
Um,
bikes on the road.
no, hopefully not. Otherwise, I'll start to get all self-righteous about cycling. But his main thing was we
Uh,
don't
no,
have
no,
to
no, no, no.
earn.
Look, I'm so old. I literally remember that toy that he was talking about, and
Okay, yeah.
asked Lynn, and she remembers it too. You can't. He was spot on. You can't imagine how
How
much this
joyful.
was the must-have gift. This was the
Yeah.
tech innovation of the century. That on this little Disney toy, Chitty Chitty Bang Bang, you could push a thing on the steering wheel, I think it was, and the wings
Mhm,
flipped out. That stayed with us profoundly. So I was really feeling this one, and also feeling old. He is
mhm.
not lying to you about how important it was to get that as a gift.
But then the gift,
Yeah.
the metaphor
Carry
of the
on.
gift became the
Mm,
gift of the atonement. It became the gift of God's love. Became the gift of the knowledge that
mm,
we are children of God. And he kept just hammering that phrase home.
mm.
And
That we are God's
that we are
actual
God's
God's
children. And he
children.
said, it's a
Yeah.
fact. You just have to not resist it. You can just accept it.
Mm.
And so this ran contrary to some of the other things we heard
Oh,
about having to earn this
amazing.
stuff
Mm,
and having to earn these blessings and all this sort of thing. He was like, "No, no,
mm.
it's just ready. It's just there. You've just got to accept it." Your thoughts on that, Peter?
It was incredible. It was like a complete evisceration of half the other talks. So the Mormon Civil War is alive and well. He is like an extreme grace-based evangelical born again. Absolutely. He said the reality is none of us is deserving. All of the Father's gifts are only received through the merits, mercy, and grace of the Holy Messiah. No compromise. Like incredible, just to pure grace based
Mhm,
religion. Unheard of in Mormonism until he really got into it, and Uchtdorf a little bit dabbled with that kind of language, started doing that
mhm,
a few years ago, and then got slapped down. So, Ed, where you were saying in your episode with Ruth that a friend told you to look at the General Conference as
mhm,
criminology, as these people are talking to each other, not to us, because then you can see the divisions. And of course, they can't be interrupted by someone else in the quorum meeting while they chew on the ranked chocolates. They are standing there in their majesty as an apostle, as a
mhm,
prophet, seer, and revelator of God, pronouncing truth. Absolutely, they're talking to each other, because he is doing a massive takedown of Oakes, of Bednar, of all these other people who are just teaching, and being
mhm,
all about being hyper anxious about your reverence, about your clothes you're wearing, about doing all the chores, doing the prayer and the scripture study, saying yes to every calling, all of that. He's just taking a flamethrower to it. And literally, our religion now is blatantly in front of your face in general conference, cafeteria Mormonism. It's a smorgasbord of completely incompatible religions, and you just pick the one that you like. And there you go. The church teaches what I like, and it teaches what I love. It teaches what you love. We get excommunicated
mhm.
for loving that stuff because some of our leaders don't agree with that bit of what gets taught in general conference. Doesn't mean it's not being taught in general conference.
Yeah, and
I mean,
Patrick
it's
is a good example of that.
extraordinary, isn't it?
Ruth
Yeah.
said,
But
"Those
again,
gifts are
oh,
from the
sorry, go on.
Father," but I bet he
Yes.
just wrote his name on the tag. Heavenly Mother picked it out. Correct,
Ha,
Ruth.
ha, 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 ha.
That
And that
is.
was another of my points. Again, he, for all his wokeness, nothing about Heavenly Mother.
Mhm,
It's all about Heavenly Father. It's all about him, his gifts to us.
mm.
Heavenly Mother doesn't get a look in. And again,
Well, because
the
Renland has
hypocrisy.
laid it down and said, "We know all we know. We're
Mm,
not gonna ask anymore, so
yeah.
be happy with it, I guess."
But they're not even saying what they do know. They could go further
Oh,
than
because
this.
they've said,
And
"Once you've read what's on the church website, you know as much as we do." And it's like that
Yeah.
kind of doesn't fly for men
Mm,
who claim to have direct access to a deity in terms of
mm.
what they say.
And after Jared, what's his face is
Oh, what's
uh
on? Is it Halverson?
the BYU guy Halverson,
Yeah.
being very tone deaf and patriarchal in sort of telling women to get their butts back to church because their unacknowledged work where they're not allowed at the pulpit to have power is essential for the survival of the church, and they should stop being worldly. Is and in amongst all the responses to how awful that was, for which he has apologized, bless him, and started talking to some feminists.
Mhm.
Um, is again this idea that he's saying it's an investment to be a woman in the church. You serve without thanks and acknowledgement. You give to keep it all going. You're not allowed to have power, but it's all an investment for the afterlife. But all these women were saying, what do you mean, the afterlife where we're eternally pregnant and we can't even talk to our children when they're not allowed to talk to us? That's it. That's all you're offering. And again, this general conference, this is all they were offering. The
Mhm.
Heavenly Mothers are silent. You can't talk to them. They can't talk to you. They'd get zero credit whatsoever for
Mhm.
everything you're attributing to the dad and the number one son.
Right.
Um,
Can we jump onto
and it
Ben
yeah,
Tai
yeah,
and his beautiful night sky, and how
mm,
he starts by painting this picture of a beautiful night sky, and how they don't get
mm,
it when they're back in Hong Kong because the sky is, light pollution, all this sort of stuff.
mm.
And you said, well, the church is trying to build temples in places that have dark sky ordinances, and they seem to be not too
And
respectful
they're
of the dark
fighting
sky
them. They
ordinances.
want to
So
they want to light up their temple and ruin Wyoming's night sky.
here we
And
have
so it's
a
really again
church
tone deaf to
leader
extol
extolling the
the
virtues of
beauty of
dark
God's
sky, and that
Just
same
making it
church
up.
undermining it. Yeah.
Craziness.
Yes, it is
He's an
craziness.
MBA.
Okay,
Benjamin Tai is an investment banker and a real estate developer.
lovely. And there wasn't much for me to say about his talk particularly. It was a really lovely talk about how his son discovered that serving a woman made him feel good, and he felt useful, and he felt like he could really, be helpful. And it was good that he was talking about these young people who might feel shy
Mm,
and might feel somewhat forgotten. It was good.
mm.
It was a good talk. It was a good talk about serving others.
Yeah.
It
And
gave me the
that's
warm
what struck
fuzzies.
me about it. Yeah, that's what struck me about it as well, is as we've pointed out in some of the other talks, he was actually taking some of the usually ignored scenarios that Latter-day Saints actually go through. So I love that. He was saying that he had a friend who had an illness that led to him losing his job and a divorce. And then his former spouse remarried and wanted a temple ceiling cancellation.
Mhm.
And he found this really difficult to handle, his friend.
But he was
And I'm
actually
like,
open and honest about his friend's feelings.
at,
His friend said
yes,
he held on
at
to
last, a
resentment.
real
Wow,
scenario.
a real thing. We're
Like
not just
a
saying,
real
"Oh, he
real,
immediately
a
realized."
messy business. Yeah.
Yes.
And
Yeah.
again, in part caused by the church's own teachings about ceilings mattering even if you're divorced, which is
Mm,
insane. I've literally been through all that myself. So I had a lot of sort of empathy for the guy's situation. Um, because yeah, I've talked about it before, but in my first marriage, my first wife did, although she'd left me in the church, did not give permission for Lynn and I to have a ceiling cancellation. So I had to choose to be polygamous if I wanted my lovely wife who wanted to marry in the temple to have that opportunity. And
mm,
then later she kind of reached out and said she had been holding resentment and had sort of changed her mind about that. Though that didn't actually happen. I just got eggs instead. But
That's one way to
the
get your ceilings cancelled, Peter.
well, yeah. Um, so I love that because it's like, no, yeah, this is the real stuff. Not women who forgive their husband because he's had an affair with the teenager and then you want to make her keep the baby and raise the child as your own. Like getting some real normal dilemmas that people are facing on the everyday. And this happens for a lot of people. And this man realized he held a lot of resentment against her and he kind of went and found peace at the temple to remove that. And again, Ben Tai was talking about humility, charity, compassion,
Mhm.
patience. you know, these lovely Christ-like qualities, and then his teenage son struggling to fit in and have self-esteem, and how he found that through this service opportunity. So I loved that. I thought this was, you know, there are still general authorities. You just, by the end of conference, there's always one or two people who've got it right. It's been that French guy, Carrier, is it? A few years ago, he did just a barnstorming
Oh,
grace-based
and he's friends with
social wickedness.
he was a bishop
Mm,
under
yeah.
Kieran. They served together.
Yes, yeah. And Kieran's done the same this time. This guy did the same. You know, when you know, you get this perception. I've got to stop saying, you know, Tony Blair does that. It's my brain tick thing. I apologize, everyone.
No.
But you know, um, there are general authorities who still get it. It's far and few between, but it gives us hope. But then is that tormenting us? Are we being tortured because they'll allow these people to speak pure grace religion, which totally contradicts what the First Presidency teach? Is it all a ploy if they are being Machiavellian just to keep us in, which has kept us in a lot longer than we would have done otherwise, a lot of people. It's the double think. It's the mental gymnastics. It's the what are you meant to do with this conference where they say all of this is the mind and will of God to the people of the church today, but it's all contradictory. It is not the same religion. And you're delusional if you can think you can make these things add up. They are literally contradictory statements. And the only consistency now is the patriarchy and editing out Heavenly Mother. So that was kind of one of my major overall thoughts about what we've just experienced. But noticed people who think we're bitter, anti-Mormon, critical, nasty people just looking for everything to be negative about. Wherever there is a glimmer of Christ-like teaching and hope and a good message, we rejoice, we celebrate it, we're acknowledging it, and we're asking for more of that, please. But don't pretend this is a consistent messaging to the world. It's a mess
Yeah.
of
Yeah.
blatant
Well,
contradictions.
Oakdor
Yeah.
here thanking the unseen people behind behind that make the conference possible. I don't think I've ever heard that before.
Mm.
But it makes you realize, yeah, of course, there's hundreds of people that go into making the conference possible. If not potentially teams of thousands, that go into making conference possible, and they actually got a thank you, which was nice. And it's weird that I've never noticed. I don't think they get a thank you normally, but maybe they do. But I've never noticed it before. Someone that doesn't tend to thank people, I don't know if he does or he doesn't, but that was a terrible attempt at a segue, is Russell M. Nelson, who came to us with a pre-recorded message. And he told us that the Lord has prompted him to prepare for the second coming. The Lord has prompted him to tell us that the second coming is on its way, people, so get yourself ready. So that, he talked about it last time as well. And then he did the most Russell M. Nelson thing I can imagine. He quoted Jesus twice, but he quoted himself. He quoted himself. Thank you very much, Zach Lightcap, for the super chat. He quoted himself, and he reiterated what he wants to see in online behavior and the behavior in our discourse online. And we're going to share the clip of him saying that because he wants us all to be peacemakers. And
those of you who took my previous counsel to heart, but we can still do better. The present hostility in public dialogue and on social media is alarming. Hateful words are deadly weapons.
Deadly weapons. Yeah.
Contention prevents the Holy Ghost from being our constant companion. As followers of Jesus Christ, we should lead the way as peacemakers. As charity becomes part of our nature, we will lose the impulse to demean others.
Demean others.
We will stop judging others. We'll have charity for those from all walks of life.
All walks
Charity
of life.
towards all men is essential to our progress. Charity is the foundation of a godly character.
Okay, charity is the foundation of a godly character. There was a few things in there that I think certain individuals online, including myself, maybe could listen to. And it is interesting that I get excommunicated for being critical, but people who are far more inclined to engage in ad hominem behavior than I am when it comes to commentary of the church towards people like me and other people aren't getting excommunicated, aren't getting called in, aren't getting in any trouble. So there's a double standard here. Russell M. Nelson's
Oh yeah.
calling for this communication. He's calling for this standard of communication, but there's no consequences for those who
No.
don't try and keep these
Is
standards.
there a single example of these hateful bigots who just really give the church a poor reputation, and you became a podcaster in response to Tits? You know, this is the show which
Yeah.
morphed into Ward Radio. That you were so shocked by that as representing Mormonism, you know, that it kind of spurred you into action. None of them get called up or told off or
No.
disciplined. You
I think
know,
the worst
they're
worst
still
that
going
happened
great
was
guns, saying
Scott
they're
Gordon
speaking
took the
for the
videos
church.
down because there was a
Yeah,
bad backlash to them.
but they're still
It,
getting funded by the same people,
yeah.
it would seem. I mean, so, you know, and we all know Nelson's regularly insulted people. He's called people lazy learners. He's called us lax disciples. If we do the research and find out he's lying and stealing and all the rest of it. So yeah, I mean, it's blatantly hypocritical. But on the whole, you know, I felt warm and fuzzy listening to him. This was a real powerful sort of plea for niceness and kindness. I just don't think it's realistic. You know, he's saying that no good solutions ever come out of conflict. It's like,
Well,
well, no, they
sometimes
actually
they
do.
do. Yeah.
You know, inspired solutions do. You have and they've talked in there about how they have disagreements within their own quorum,
Hmm.
and then they arrive at the inspired solution. But it comes from an open debate and discussion. So
Hmm.
that's not actually true. This idea of, oh, everyone should just be nice and there should be no contention and we'll never argue and that will solve the church and that will heal the world doesn't work like that. You need the marketplace of ideas.
You
You
need
need to have
respectful pushback. You
you need
need
to prove,
respectful debate.
yeah, you need analysis. You need the proving the contraries that these people
Hmm.
like to quote Joseph Smith a lot now saying.
Whereas
So it's not realistic.
you've got some of the people we're
Um,
talking about who I won't name
mm,
because for various reasons, but they have
mm,
talked about niceness culture being
mm,
the terrible thing that the leaders of the church are infected with.
yeah.
What?
Well, yeah. Well, I'll name them. Ward Radio says that. Quick Media says that. To some extent, Connor Boyack, who I'm really fascinated by, um, and yeah,
I
there's
just don't
a
want to
lot of
give them
these.
oxygen,
They've bought
because
into this.
it's just
No,
some
but
pretty
no, go
toxic
and listen to
stuff.
them. Well, but also they are realizing things are broken here, and they're realizing that these people, in doing their niceness culture, which we criticize as well, the passive aggression, the toxic positivity, is not actually having robust or honest conversations with people, and it's missing, and it's not fighting for the church to survive. And they share my passion for the church to actually get real about its problems and address them
Hmm.
and survive. And what is starting to happen is the more they talk about it and look, the more, whether they admit it under torture or not, they are starting to agree with us about what the problems are, which includes the niceness culture where you don't actually address issues, where you never discuss things and reach the
Mm.
solution, where you can't cope with a different point of view at all. They realize this is unhealthy as well, even, you know, because it's not serving their agenda either. So I do think there's some interesting bridges we can build around that. But you know, he's saying we must have charity for all walks of life, but they're not giving callings to all walks of life. Let's think about that a minute.
Mhm.
We all know there's rampant hostility to the LGBTQ people. They're definitely not giving charity to those walks of life. Um, but we've just sat through conference of general authority after general authority after general authority from many extremely niche and specific educational and career backgrounds,
Hmm.
lawyers, business people, some medical people. That's mostly it, over and over again. That is a tiny oligarchy they're perpetuating in their own image. People like themselves, exactly. Same lifestyle, same career. They see themselves in them. They mentor them up the ranks into the general
Hmm.
authorities. So he's not practicing that. If he had charity for all walks of life, he'd be calling the farmers, the teachers, the artists, the theologians, the academics as general authorities. He'd
Mm.
model that, but he's not. So, they're not practicing what they preach, and that is a fundamental problem that
There's
is
a point
harming the
here
church and
by Ma-
limiting its scope and
mm.
potential. Yeah.
There's a point here by Matt Stoker I just want to raise where he says, "Isn't it also the lowest hanging fruit? Be nice on social media." Is what the prophet
Mm,
of the ever living God has to say in these tumultuous times. And without, and I'm forbidding you to go into it, Peter, without going into exactly what's going on in the United States,
mm,
it is a
mm,
turbulent time right now. I think we can all
mm.
agree. And
But
being nice.
the cynical view before this conference was lots of people were saying they are not going to address what's going on in our
Mhm,
country. They will not do it, but he actually did.
mhm.
So by the very last talk, kudos to him.
But
He
did
is
he
at
address
least
it, or did you
expressing
say
alarm.
be
Yes,
nice
he
in your
said
social media
he
conversations?
said the current hostility in public dialogue, so that's the
Mhm.
politics, and in social media. So
Let's have a
he did address
Those
it.
of you
Yeah.
who
let's
took
have another
my
listen.
previous counsel
Mm,
to heart, but we can still do better. The present hostility in public dialogue and on social media
Okay.
is alarming.
Yeah. Fair enough. Okay.
he's paying attention to
Mhm.
what's become normal in the politics.
Yeah.
It's all too late, and they did nothing to stop their own people voting for it all. But Oakes has expressed this concern a year or two ago. He, kind of post-COVID, and the cat was already out of the bag with just the culture war
Mhm.
rhetoric that a lot of Mormons were participating in. So I've
Mhm.
heard actually this was definitely one of Nelson's better talks. He was actually
Well,
at
no one got
least
called a
in his
lazy
own way.
learner. No
No,
one.
that's right. And he at least acknowledged that there is this descent into hatred and tribalism, and it's really ramped up. I mean,
Mhm.
he's not, being specific at all, but we
And
know
again, we're
what
not
he's
going to do it
referencing.
here
Yeah.
because it's not. I don't feel it's our place. But
Yeah.
Rob Jameson, it would be the place of the prophet who claims to have responsibility for the entire world, not just the
Yeah.
United States. Um,
Mm,
it
yeah.
says, "Where's the value
And
in
there was a
pointing out the
prayer.
obvious problem? Why not delve into the roots of the
Mm,
problem?" And I do think
mm.
that's fair.
And
Um,
was it Alan Phillips who someone in their prayer referenced the turmoil and uncertainty all over the world? So that was
someone
the
did. I
only
don't
other
don't recall who.
mention that I noticed, that was kind of getting on topic,
Mhm.
Um,
Okay, well, that's that
interesting.
really. We had a
Mm,
closing prayer from Tracy Y. Browning, who still absolutely is in my good books for just not doing primary voice, just being herself. Love that.
mm, yeah.
So thank you very much, Peter, for
Oh,
joining
my
me.
pleasure.
Thank you very
More of
much.
the same, but also lots of new to think about and
Mhm.
chew on. It was an interesting conference, and
And we can dive
I
in
think
deeper in the coming weeks.
yeah. But certainly the abortion talk from Anderson is going to be the most controversial and talked about long
I think
term, I
so.
think.
Yeah.
Otherwise, it's the Civil War continues, completely different versions of this religion taught from the General Conference pulpit
Hmm.
in the same meetings.
Yes.
And
Sometimes one after
it
the
just
other.
doesn't make sense.
Mhm.
Sometimes it makes no sense. How are you expecting people to have a unified identity as Latter-day
Mhm.
Saints when the apostles themselves can't even agree on what the religion is?
Yeah.
It's a mess.
Okay. Well, thank you very much, Peter. Thank you very much, everyone, for watching. If you liked this video, there is a button dedicated on this page, wherever you're watching, to tell me that you liked it. It's a little thumbs up, so go click on that. If you didn't like it, you can click on that other one. As Ruth is saying in the chat, yep, see you again in 6 months for this format, but I will see you in about a week's time. Fear not, you won't be without me for long. I will be back. Make sure you subscribe so you see that. If you want this work to continue, this is my full-time job, so $5, $10, $15 a month. Regular donations are really helpful. You can become a channel member, which is a smaller amount. It's just another way you can support me. And one-off donations are also fine if that's all you can do. But liking and subscribing are the best way to tell YouTube, the algorithm, everything else that you like what I do. So thank you very much, everyone. And I'll see you very soon. I'm going to go get some sleep. And I'm going to sleep for many, many long hours.